With UFC 300, I feel like a lot of people are overlooking the main event between Jamahal Hill and Alex Pereira. A lot of people think Pereira is just going to completely spark this guy and knock him out, which I don't think it's going to be that easy for Pereira. Now, I'm not saying Jamahal Hill is going to win. I'm not saying Pereira is going to win. I think it's a very close fight and a lot closer than what people are giving it, and here's why. I'm going to make a bold prediction that Jamahal Hill will fight as a southpaw most of the time in this fight, and the only times he's going to switch is when he is in the line of fire in boxing range. That's when he'll go back to Orthodox. While I do think Orthodox will be a nightmare with Alex Pereira because of the calf kick and how wide Jamahal Hill stands, I do think that the ability to stand as a southpaw and the way Jamahal Hill moves as a southpaw helps it a lot in terms of trying to stop that calf kick. I talked about Alex Pereira and his form of tunneling in MMA, where a lot of punches kind of look the same until the very end. You can check that video out up here. I talked about his left hook. It is a very dangerous move. However, Jamahal Hill as a southpaw circles to get to the outside foot very heavily. He's in the kickboxing range, but all the way on one side of the kickboxing range, not to the other side. And that side is usually the very weak side of the opponent. Now, Jamahal Hill is playing with fire because that left hook of Alex Pereira is very deadly. I talked about it in my Alex Pereira video. Once again, you can go check that out. However, when he is on that outside foot, he's almost very far away to the point of boxing range, but he's not really getting to the guy. We see that in Johnny Walker. This whole epiphany that I'm having of Jamahal Hill being a southpaw the whole fight is coming off of that Johnny Walker fight, because Johnny Walker is a very powerful, unpredictable man. And what did Jamahal Hill do? Jamahal Hill circled around his outside foot and to his, quote, not his power side, and was almost out of reach most of the fight. A lot of the fight for Hill was overreaching, not really getting to the target, and when he did get to the target, it's because Johnny Walker is coming back at him. Now, that is what I want to go to my next point. Jamahal Hill is mainly a counterpuncher, but he's a very pressure-heavy counterpuncher. He constantly goes to that outside foot, which makes it very hard to circle to that range. So the only way you can go is back and then left once again to the weak side, or you can circle fully to the to the power side. Now, I think that will maybe be the big question in this fight is, can Alex Pereira turn Jamahal Hill? Now, what do I mean by that? I want to talk about Alex Pereira, Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland was constantly pressuring him and trying to get to that foot to maybe a better boxing range, better angles, and Alex Pereira was able to constantly circle him and turn him. He's not moving backwards. We saw Sean Strickland versus Adesanya. The main issue for Adesanya was he kept moving backwards. He wasn't circling. If you look at the path of where Alex Pereira was the whole fight, he's constantly towards that first black line in the octagon, and he's circling around that. Now, Strickland's pressuring very heavy, but if you really think about it, it's Alex Pereira he still has all his weapons still at use, and that's how he got to that KO against Sean Strickland. There was no backing up all the way against the cage, and then he doesn't really have anywhere to go. He can't move backwards anymore, and now he has to circle. That was the issue with Sean Strickland versus Adesanya. Alex Pereira is a master of countering pressure by turning somebody or counter punching them with a left hook, with a calf kick, anything along those lines. We see that in most of his knockouts that isn't the Izzy knockout. Strickland, he got the knockout. Yuri Prohaska, he got the knockout the same sort of way. Yuri was in the boxing range void, overreached, and Alex Pereira punished him for it. And that is a very big issue and a very big question I have for this fight is, can Jamahal Hill not be in that range where Alex Pereira can just land a typhoon of a left hook or a tsunami of a right hook? That is the main issue I'm having, because in the Johnny Walker fight, we did see that there was a lot of times where Hill was almost overreaching and not crashing into boxing range, but was playing into that boxing range. Now, once again, he's on one heavy side of the boxing range, that being your left side. But once again, we've seen Alex Pereira knock people out with that left hook, even fading backwards. We saw that in the fight that got him into the UFC, where he threw a high kick and then faded backward and hit a left hook. Now, that's the main issue in terms of, can that left hook even land on Jamahal Hill because of how outside Jamahal Hill is with that foot placement? And when Southpaw wasn't really working for Jamahal Hill in terms of landing punches, he switched up to Orthodox and countered off of that. Johnny Walker threw a jab where Jamahal Hill slipped and threw an overhand that landed just up here on the forehead and still knocked Johnny Walker out, which brings me to my next point. This is a very powerful fight, guys. These guys are not fighting for rounds. They're not fighting to maybe edge out decision. This fight is going to end by a knockout, or these two are way too tough for their own good and it's going to go to a hard fought decision. But they're not playing for points. These two are ready to absolutely light each other up because they have a blistering power. We see that Jamahal Hill against a tough motherfucker in Glover who couldn't put him out, but all his other fights have ended by knockout, other than the Thiago Santos fight, which at that point Thiago Santos was putting on very boring performances. Jamahal Hill against Jimmy Crute, against Johnny Walker, was just putting on some bangers in terms of knockout. Another thing Jamahal Hill does a lot, and we saw it in the Glover Teixeira fight, is the body kick from the southpaw position. He throws it to the body, he throws it to the head. He will differentiate where he's throwing. And that could be a very big issue in terms of cutting off Alex Pereira so he doesn't turn Jamahal Hill. If that body kick is coming to the power side, the only way Alex Pereira will be able to turn Jamahal Hill would be going through and stepping on the outside foot, the one that Jamahal Hill is overachieving in terms of those footworks. So we might see a world where Alex Pereira does get pressured back to the fence if that body kick is a big issue in the fight. And when he does get pressured, you see Jamahal Hill will switch his stance. He'll switch to Orthodox so he can land his power punches. He's almost like how Dustin switches his stance when he does have someone hurt. This case, Jamahal Hill does not have anyone hurt. He's just planning to hurt somebody. We see that in most of the Glover fight. When Glover is against the cage, Jamahal Hill switches to Orthodox and he'll look for things in terms of uppercuts, in terms of overhands. He'll praw out with his jab where he'll just kind of tap. He's not really trying to hit, and then he'll hit one big punch with his right hand. It's a very methodical pace and it can go horribly for Jamahal Hill. We see that a lot in terms of Alex Pereira's gameplay, where he will be able to turn you and slowly start setting up his things, whether it's a body jab, whether it's a calf kick, whether it's the left hook, whether it's anything along those lines. A lot of Pereira's punches are just so masked in terms of you don't know what's coming until the very last moment it hits you. And so this fight is a lot more interesting in terms of what is going to be the game plan for these two, because I think if Jamahal Hill does go Orthodox early on in the fight, that might be the decider. If Alex Pereira can land 4 to 5 leg kicks in that first round, the way he did it to Yuri in that Orthodox stance, Jamahal Hill won't have that much power, and also Jamahal Hill won't be pressuring as heavy. It will be an Alex Pereira pressure fest. And we see in the countless number of boxing and kickboxing matches that Alex Pereira has, where he will be able to break you down slowly but surely in that pressure heavy style. This guy found the chin of Izzy. This guy found the chin of Strickland. He found the chin of Yuri. He's finding chins no matter what it is. It's going to be a very rough fight. There are some very big questions in this fight. I have 5 in terms of what can be the decider of this fight. Number 1, is Jamahal Hill going to go to that Orthodox stance early? Because if he does, it might be game over, because Jamahal Hill has a very wide boxing stance. His stance in general is just very wide, and if he is going to that Orthodox where Alex Pereira is able to mask and tunnel all his punches, and then 4 to 5 leg kicks later, Jamahal Hill's not pressuring anymore. Jamahal Hill has no real power in some of his punches, and then it's a Alex Pereira slugfest. We see Alex Pereira find the chin of everybody when he's able to set up his things. We see it in the Yuri fight, we see it in the Strong Strickland fight, we see it in the Adesanya first fight, and the Adesanya second fight, really, but right before he got knocked out, where he was able to set up all his things through the calf kick. And if Jamahal Hill's in that Orthodox stance, that calf kick is a lot easier to land. Now, another question is, can Hill even stop the leg kicks from Southpaw? Although Southpaw is a lot easier, given how Hill fights in Southpaw, he's not really going to the power side of Alex Pereira, and the only way Alex Pereira will be able to land a kick is if he swings his whole body through the boxing range, which It's a very telegraph strike. And Jamahal Hill, when he does get leg kicked, either A, backs up, or B, fights it with fire and actually will throw a 2 over the leg kick to try to crowd the leg kick. And if Alex Pereira is throwing it from that orthodox to a southpaw stance, that's when we have issues. My next question, and it's not really the biggest question, is if Jamahal Hill goes southpaw, does Alex Pereira go southpaw? Because from the southpaw stance, from both being southpaw, you just have the same situation of Alex Pereira's calf kick, but from an orthodox, from a left-handed position, where Alex Pereira will be able to land any calf kick he wants in that fight. And if he does, it might be game over for Jamahal Hill. However, I'm going purely based on the fact that I feel like it's going to be a southpaw orthodox fight. My next big question that will really determine the fight is, can Jamahal Hill get Alex Pereira on his back foot? And not just any back foot. Can he actually get him moving backwards? There is a difference between being on your back foot and moving backwards. Once again, Alex Pereira versus Sean Strickland, where Alex Pereira was not moving backwards. He was technically, but he was circling. And so Sean Strickland never got his back to the cage. He was constantly getting a Alex Pereira that was moving in terms of a circle. Watch that whole fight again. It's a big old circle throughout that whole matchup before the knockout. While we see Sean Strickland, when he does pressure somebody like Israel Adesanya, Israel wasn't able to turn Sean Strickland. And so he was constantly on the back foot the whole fight. And we see Israel was very frustrated in terms of he couldn't find his jab. He couldn't really find much, because when you are backing up to that degree where you are against the cage the whole fight, you lose a lot of your long range attacks. If Jamahal Hill can get Pereira with his back on the cage, that can take away a lot of Pereira's strikes. I think Pereira, when he is on the back foot in terms of his back against the cage, he really only has the counter left hook and maybe a calf kick that can jam up the fight. However, his long range attacks in terms of his body jab, his kicks, a lot of his 1-2s, they really lose a lot of flavor when he does have his back against the cage. And we see that in that Yuri Prochazka fight right before the knockout. Yuri was really pressure heavy, and the only thing Alex was really doing was either getting the calf kick going, getting the left hook in terms of countering, we saw that in the knockout, or landing the body jab very minuscule. And we do know the footwork of Jamahal Hill is a lot more polished, a lot more fundamental than Yuri Prochazka, who is overreaching a lot. And so if Jamahal Hill can keep that sort of footwork range where he doesn't really get hit by those types of punches, we could see a 2-move Alex Pereira. And Jamahal Hill is a lot more talented than just a 2-move Alex Pereira. My last and final question is Jamahal Hill going to be the counter heavy fighter that he usually is? The fight against Glover, where he did take action, is probably the best sort of fight in terms of Jamahal Hill. If he is not wrestling and he's saying what he's saying about, I'm going to get the knockout, I'm going to knock him out. If we're not looking at a wrestling fest coming in, can he take initiative in terms of striking first? Because you have a fight between two very high level counter fighters. If you really look at it, Alex doesn't really fight off his front foot too much, and when he is, it's because he already damaged the legs of his opponents, where it's a lot easier to walk in to the fire. Jamahal Hill, however, does like to counter first before he does take initiative. Are we going to see a Jamahal Hill that takes initiative first? Because this fight is a tale of two very high-tech counter fighters. As much as people don't really rate Jamahal Hill, people think he's a little bit sloppier, he is a very talented counter fighter. He has a good check hook, he has a good overhand to a jab. We see that in the Jimmy Crute knockout, we see that in the Johnny Walker knockout, where both are reveled in terms of how is Jamahal Hill going to be if he is fighting such a high-tech guy in Alex Pereira. If Jamahal Hill is going to be tentative and waiting on Alex, this fight might be over, because it is almost impossible to try to get a read on Alex Pereira. The only people that can really get a read on Alex is high level kickboxers, maybe an Israel Adesanya, but we haven't seen anyone really understand Alex Pereira's game because of what I was talking about in my Alex Pereira video, the tunneling. It is hard to see a punch that looks the same as an overhand, that looks the same as a calf kick, that looks the same. All his body movements look the exact same until it finally isn't. And that reaction time, you don't have time for that you can wait on, you can get a read on, because it's almost impossible to. If you let Alex Pereira play his game, it is game over. I think the best way to fight Alex Pereira, if you aren't wrestling with him, is if you're going to be right outside that boxing range where you could maybe crowd a kick, but also not right in the void where you have to worry about all of Alex's tricks, all of his knees, his left hooks, his body jabs, anything that really Alex throws. It is a very hard tell. It's a very hard fight if you're in the void. Jamahal Hill needs to be exactly where he was in the Johnny Walker fight. Trying to get to the outside foot, being so far on the edge of that outside foot that you aren't able to really get anything other than the left hook. And if you know one punch is coming, only one, it is a lot easier to solve than being right square with a guy that looks the exact same in all of his fights. Guys, no matter what, this UFC 300 card is going to be amazing. Let me know if you guys want any breakdowns after UFC 300. I will gladly do them. I'll gladly do anyone on this card. Anybody on this card, I will gladly do. Just leave it in the comments. I will be more than willing to do so. Guys, let me know what you have in Jamahal Hill versus Alex Pereira. Are you overlooking Jamahal Hill? Because if you are, you got to start checking film, buddy, because this fight is a lot harder than what you think. There's a lot of questions that need to be asked before you can determine who is going to win this fight, who has a better shot of winning this fight. And if you think it's Alex Pereira, which I sort of have, I have 52% Pereira to the 48% Jamahal Hill. But if you do think it's Alex Pereira, and you do think it's it's a very big reason why, leave in the comments. I'd love to talk. I'd love to talk about the fight. Otherwise, let's enjoy UFC 300. It's been Santi. It's been Studs.